Hey, beautiful souls. I'm Emily, and over the next few videos, I'm going to be sharing some insights from my folklore master's thesis, which was all about female folkloric creatures and how can we reclaim them in empowering ways. So today, let's talk about the story of the captive maiden. This is an ancient story that appears again and again in different forms all over the world. Other folklorists call this recurring motif the swan maiden and talk about the story being a romantic tragedy. I call her the captive maiden because although she's not always a swan, she is always captured and always, somehow, she escapes. I don't think these stories are romantic tragedies. I think they are teaching stories for women. They carry a message of hope and survival, and to my mind, the ending is a happy one. So, who is the captive or swan maiden? Sometimes she's a mermaid, sometimes a seal woman, a selkie, who can shed her seal skin and dance on land in human form. Sometimes she's a swan or a goose maiden who sheds her feathers the same way. Sometimes she's a rusalka, which is a Slavic water spirit. So here's a typical captive maiden story. This one is a folktale from Bulgaria. Many years ago, a shepherd was walking through the forest near a lake when he heard the sound of girls' laughter and dancing feet, creeping quietly forward until he could glimpse the edge of the lake. He was transfixed by the sight of the three most beautiful maidens he'd ever seen, dancing together and playing naked in the water. Then he noticed along the bank three shimmering heaps of clothing. He crept up to them and found that each pile had a soft white silk dress, a leafy green sash, and a pair of wings. These women must be rusalki, he realized, the enticing but dangerous magical water spirits he'd heard so many stories about from his grandmother. Impulsively, he grabbed one of the sets of clothing and ran away into the bushes. Soon enough, the three rusalki, their game's over, returned to collect their clothing. But Radka, the most beautiful, searched in vain. Her sisters dressed and flew away, but without her belongings, Radka was trapped. Emerging from the bushes, the shepherd spoke to her. I have your clothing, but I will not give it back. I want you to come and be my wife. Because he'd interpreted her beauty as an invitation, despite not being given any encouragement. Radka pleaded for the return of her clothing and with it her powers, but he wouldn't relent. And eventually she had to return with him to the village where he lived. What else could she do? So a year passed and Radka gave birth to a son. But time away from the water was telling on her. Her skin was becoming dry, her hair lank and lifeless. Her eyes, once sparkling with joy and laughter, were dull and filled with longing. She no longer danced. The shepherd, proud of his new baby, arranged a party to celebrate. And at the feast, his guests drank a lot of wine and began calling to see the famous dance of the rusalka. Make your wife dance for us, they rather boorishly demanded. Dance for our guests, insisted the shepherd, but Radka refused. I cannot dance without my soft white silk dress, my leafy green sash, or my wings, she said. Give them back to me and I will dance. The shepherd hesitated, but his friends pressured him, and so despite his misgivings, he fetched the clothes he'd stolen from Radka the year before by the lake. And putting them on, she was transformed back into the ethereal beauty that the shepherd first glimpsed. Laughing with joy, she whirled once, twice, three times, and flew away back to her sisters, never to return. And that's the basic story with many variations, often a magic garment, a cap, or an enchanted cloak will be stolen from a mermaid, or the skin or feathers stolen from a selkie or a bird maiden. In an 8th century Chinese version, a crane maiden has her robe stolen. In one old Inuit tale, a man captures a seal maiden by using his parka as a straitjacket to bind her. Ugh. At first glance, the swan maiden might seem like a victim, but in fact, she is gloriously transgressive. No matter how long she is held captive, she is never truly tamed. She cannot be held indefinitely. No matter that she's separated from her sisters, she finds her way back to them. She always escapes in the end. Sometimes she tricks her captor into giving back her possessions, like Ragka. Sometimes she stumbles across its hiding place, like one Norwegian tale of the seal woman. Sometimes her child gives it back to her. Occasionally, her sisters come back to rescue her. There's a Siberian tale in which a goose maiden and her children are all given new wings by some passing geese, enabling them all to fly away. Or she may just rescue herself. In one captive maiden story from Greenland, the woman can't recover her original feather dress, but she still makes herself a new one. She still flies away. Now, you may be wondering, why are these tales considered romantic tragedies? I certainly wondered that when I first started to study them. Only if you take a very patriarchal view that the escape of the maiden is some sort of blow to her captor, who loses what he thinks of as his prize, can there be any sense of tragedy? Seen as a man's story, these tales seem to suggest women are a possession to be claimed, and the way to do this is by force, which is considered romantic. This is kind of feeding into this Hollywood idea of romance as this male persistence in the face of female refusal. So female power and voice are to be feared, and women are more easily controlled if separated from other women. The new bride often brings wealth and prosperity, but she must be watched at all times in case she reverts to her wild nature and abandons her family. But these stories can be read another way. When she writes about the selkie, Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who's a Jungian psychoanalyst, she speaks of considering these tales as instructional stories for how not to lose one's soul skin or true nature. She sees the selkie's lost skin as her soul or creative spirit. The theft of the pelt can be any inside or outside pressure that takes a woman away from herself. So seen this way, they can be instructional stories for women regarding reclaiming our true nature and returning home spiritually and creatively. It's not a coincidence that water is so often the home of our captive maidens. Selkies, mermaids, water spirits, water birds, they're almost always linked with water. So water is mythologically associated with birth, the primordial womb waters and female mysteries. Jung wrote about water being the most common symbol for the unconscious. And in a patriarchal society, what is most repressed into the collective unconscious is largely going to be feminine. So the ocean is thought of as uncivilized, dangerous, and wild. It represents the female nature, standing in contrast to the civilized, safe, male culture. And this is an association we see in societies all over the world, that women have this tendency to be associated with nature and men with culture. When captive maidens are forced to leave the water, they're disconnected from nature and what might be thought of as the wild feminine, to be tamed by culture. But these folkloric maidens are liminal. They're neither one thing nor the other. They live between the sea and the earth. So we can see them as opening up this creative possibility to challenge this duality, nature, culture, to challenge this separation of patriarchal thought. Maybe from these stories of maidens that are neither nature nor culture, but a hybrid of both, we can see our own way back to the sea. The pelt that is our connection to our sisters and to the wild nature can be recovered no matter where it is hidden, or a new one can be made. The story of separation can be replaced by one of connectivity. When we read these stories with new eyes, we see that the captive maiden is not a victim, but a survivor. She teaches that no matter what cultural conditioning would have us believe, we cannot be permanently subdued, and we can always find our way back home to ourselves. The wild, the creative life, the part of us that is free and sensual, is our own silk white dress, leafy green sash, and wings of the rusalka. They may be hidden from us by the demands of day-to-day life, or by cultural messaging that suggests to express our true nature might be too much. We may be convinced that we're not enough, or not as perfect as we need to be. These thoughts are the theft of the selkie skin or the mermaid's cap. But we can reclaim our truth, our sensuality, our embodied wisdom, and we too can take back our power. When stripped of the patriarchal distortion of romance, these stories actually do have happy endings. If you'd like a sister to walk beside you as you reweave your own cloak of feathers or recover your own sealskin or mermaid cap, I would love to support you in your journey of rewilding and homecoming. Feel free to reach out to me via my website below. I'm here for you with so much love.